My MIL staged a family emergency and called my husband, saying she was in the hospital. When he rushed over, he found her sitting in the cafeteria, laughing with friends. "You came for me," she said smugly. He left without saying a word. My mother-in-law, Margaret, has always been a problem. From the first time I met her, I could tell she didn't approve of me. She made sure I knew it too, subtle digs, fake smiles, and little, accidental, slights that always somehow ended up making me feel small. She never liked that I took her son's attention away from her. She never liked that we moved a few hours away for his job. She never liked that he put me first. But what she did last month, that was beyond anything I could have imagined. It started on an average Friday night. Daniel and I had just settled into the couch after a long work week. We had dinner, poured some wine, and picked out a movie. It was finally time to unwind. Then his phone rang. I glanced over. Margaret's name was on the screen. Daniel sighed, already annoyed. We both knew that when Margaret called late at night, it was never good. Either she wanted something or she was about to start drama. But when he answered, everything changed. Her voice was shaking. "Danny?" she gasped. "Oh my God, Danny, I need you." Daniel shot up from the couch. His entire face went pale. "Mom? What's wrong?" She choked back a sob. "I'm in the hospital. The doctors, they don't know if I'm gonna make it." I sat up, my heart pounding. "What happened?" Daniel asked, already grabbing his shoes. A shaky breath. "They think it's my heart. Please, baby, I don't have much time. I need you here. Please." Daniel was out the door in seconds. I barely had time to react. I asked which hospital. He told me the name, then he was gone before I could grab my keys. I sat there, stunned, my stomach in knots. Margaret wasn't young, but she was healthy. No history of heart problems, no serious illnesses. If this was real, it had come out of nowhere. I texted Daniel to keep me updated and sat by my phone, waiting. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. No updates. Finally, after over an hour, my phone dinged. A single text from Daniel. She lied. I stared at the words, confused. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel. She lied. He repeated the second I picked up. His voice was low, dangerously calm. I gripped the phone. "What do you mean?" "She's fine," he said. "She was never sick. Never admitted. I got here and checked with the nurses, no record of her anywhere. Then she texted me to meet her in the cafeteria." My stomach dropped. "She was sitting there," he continued, voice tight, "laughing with her friends. Eating a fucking sandwich." I didn't speak. I couldn't. "She saw me and smiled," he said. "Like it was all a game. You know what she said?" I could barely get the words out. "What?" "You came for me." Silence. Then I asked, "What did you say?" "Nothing," he said. I walked out. I sat there, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart was raging in my chest. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Margaret had faked a medical emergency. She made her own son believe she was dying. For what? A test? A game? Some twisted need to prove he still loved her? I could hear the anger in Daniel's breathing. He was furious. More furious than I had ever seen him. And the worst part? Margaret would never stop. Not unless we did something about it. I knew right then that it was time to put an end to her games. For good. I spent the entire night seething. Margaret had pulled a lot of stunts before, but this was the lowest she had ever gone. I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the conversation. The way Daniel had sounded when he said the words, "She lied." She played with his emotions. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had weaponized his love for her, used it against him. She wanted to prove that no matter how much he had pulled away from her, she still had control. That at the end of the day, she could still snap her fingers and make him come running. It made me sick. The next morning, I made sure everyone knew what she had done. I called Daniel's siblings. His cousins. His aunt. Every single family member who Margaret liked to play the perfect mother act around. I didn't embellish. I didn't exaggerate. I simply said, "Did you hear about Margaret's emergency last night?" Of course, they hadn't. So I told them. Every single detail. Word spread fast. By noon, Margaret was getting calls from multiple relatives. By evening, people were calling Daniel, demanding to know if it was true. And the best part? She had no way to deny it. Daniel had proof. Texts. Call logs. The fact that the hospital had no record of her ever being there. She tried, of course. Tried to twist the story, make it sound like a misunderstanding. Oh, I never said it was that serious. I just needed support and didn't know how to ask. But nobody bought it. The shame alone should have been enough to make her think twice before pulling another stunt. But I wasn't done yet. Margaret had humiliated Daniel. It was only fair she got a taste of her own medicine. I waited for the perfect opportunity, one where she couldn't weasel her way out of it. And it came 2 weeks later, at one of her beloved family gatherings. Margaret loved to play hostess. She loved being the center of attention. She had spent years making herself the queen of family events. And I was about to ruin that for her. Daniel and I arrived like normal. We greeted everyone, made small talk, acted completely fine. Margaret was playing the victim, shooting sad little glances at Daniel, clearly hoping he'd crack and tell her everything was okay. Then, at dinner, Daniel stood up and clinked his glass. Margaret smiled. She thought he was about to make some kind of sentimental speech. Then he said, "I just have one question before we eat." He turned to her, his expression stone cold. "How did you recover so fast from your deadly illness in the hospital cafeteria?" Silence. A few people gasped. Heads turned. Everyone stared at Margaret. Her face went pale. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. Daniel didn't blink. "You know exactly what I mean." The tension was thick. You could hear a pin drop. People started whispering. Margaret's face turned red. Her eyes darted around the table, searching for an escape. She had none. I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. Margaret's face twisted into something ugly: shock, rage, humiliation. She knew she had no way out, but she hated that she'd been cornered like this. She let out a forced, awkward laugh. "Daniel, sweetheart, I think you're misunderstanding what happened." Daniel just stared at her. Silent. Waiting. She shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. "I never said I was dying. I felt off, and I panicked. You know how these hospitals are, always overreacting." I cut in, my voice sharp. "The doctors didn't overreact. They didn't even see you. Because you were never a patient." The room was dead silent. You could feel the tension thick in the air. Margaret's friends, the same ones she had been laughing with in the cafeteria, looked away. The family members who had called her, demanding answers, were now watching her squirm in real time. I could see it in her eyes. She was trapped. Daniel let the silence drag out, making sure everyone absorbed what had just happened. Then, calmly, he set his napkin down and said, "You lied. You manipulated me." "And for what?" "To see if I'd drop everything and come running?" Margaret's jaw clenched. "I just needed you, Daniel. I wanted to see if you still cared." He let out a slow, bitter chuckle. "So you faked a medical emergency?" She had nothing to say. Nothing. Her brother, Uncle Robert, shook his head. "Christ, Margaret. What the hell is wrong with you?" Her sister-in-law muttered under her breath. "Unbelievable." Margaret's face turned an ugly shade of red. She glared at me, as if this was my fault. As if I was the one who put her in this mess. Dinner went on, but Margaret barely ate. She had lost. The family had seen her for what she really was. But I knew Margaret. She wouldn't let this go. She was already plotting her next move. Margaret didn't speak to us for 2 weeks. No calls. No texts. I thought, for a brief, naive second, that maybe, just maybe, she had learned her lesson. That the public humiliation had been enough to keep her in check. I was wrong. Because one afternoon, Daniel got a call from his boss. His CEO. Margaret had filed a complaint against him. She told his company that he had been verbally abusive to his elderly, sick mother. That he had neglected her during a medical crisis. That he had abandoned her in a hospital when she needed him the most. She was trying to get him fired. I could see Daniel's hands shaking as he got off the call. His face was stone cold, but his knuckles were white from gripping his phone too tight. "She told them I left her to die in a hospital," he said, his voice low and sharp. My stomach twisted. "What?" "She told them I was a dangerous person who couldn't be trusted in a leadership position." I felt my blood boil. Margaret had pulled some insane stunts before, but this? She was playing dirty. She was willing to put Daniel's entire career on the line just because she was embarrassed. "What did your boss say?" I asked. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temple. "He said they had to look into it. HR is going to do an internal review." "Do they believe her?" "I don't know." I saw the worry in his eyes. And that's when I snapped. Margaret wanted to go to war? Fine. She wanted to ruin Daniel's career? Game on. I was going to make sure she regretted every second of it. I started gathering evidence. Texts. Call logs. Anything that proved Margaret was lying. Daniel had her fake emergency call saved on his phone. I had screenshots of the text she sent him from the hospital cafeteria. But that wasn't enough. If Margaret wanted to play the concerned mother role, I was going to rip that mask off in front of everyone. And I had the perfect way to do it. Margaret loved her social circle. The women she gossiped with, the church groups, the charity organizations. Her precious reputation was built on looking like the perfect, respectable matriarch. So I made sure every single person in that circle knew exactly what she had done. I contacted one of Margaret's close friends, Eleanor. A woman who lived for drama. I acted casual. Just a concerned daughter-in-law reaching out. I just wanted to clear something up, I said sweetly. Margaret told Daniel's company that he abandoned her in the hospital, but I thought she was having dinner with you that night? Silence. Then Eleanor let out a gasp. Wait, what? Oh, maybe I misunderstood, I said innocently. She did say she was in the hospital, right? Eleanor was eating it up. No. She wasn't sick. She said she was just testing if Daniel would come. I mused. That's strange. Because she told his job that he left her in a medical crisis. Eleanor lost it. She was on the phone with 2 other friends within the hour. Within a day, the entire church group knew. The charity ladies? Knew. The family? Knew. Margaret had thrown a grenade at Daniel's career. I had just dropped a nuclear bomb on her entire social life. The next morning, Margaret called Daniel. Screaming. You did this! You ruined my reputation! My friends won't talk to me! Daniel simply said. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? She freaked. I only told your boss because you embarrassed me. You forced my hand. Daniel laughed. A sharp, bitter laugh. You tried to ruin my career because your ego got bruised. And now you're mad because people know the truth? She was fuming. You don't do this to family. Daniel's face turned to steel. Neither do you, Mom. Then he hung up. And that was the moment I knew Margaret was finally losing control. But I had one last move to make. Because Margaret had one final weakness. And I was about to destroy it. Margaret was spiraling. The humiliation, the fallout, the fact that her little game had backfired spectacularly, she couldn't handle it. She went full victim mode. She started calling family members, sobbing about how Daniel had turned against her. And how I was poisoning him. Against his own mother. She tried guilt-tripping his siblings, playing the lonely, abandoned mother. She even told his elderly grandmother that she was being cut out of her own son's life. Because of me. I'll admit she got to a few of them. Daniel's younger sister, Rachel, called him. I get that Mom messed up, but she's miserable, Dan. She's been crying for days. She says she feels like she lost her son. Daniel just sighed. She's upset because she got caught. Rachel hesitated. I just think, maybe you could talk to her? Just to smooth things over? Daniel was done. If Mom wants to make things right, she can apologize instead of trying to make me feel bad for calling her out. Rachel didn't have much to say after that. But Margaret? She wasn't done yet. Because the next move she made? It was beyond psychotic. Margaret was desperate to regain control, and when manipulation didn't work, she tried a new approach: money. Daniel got a text from his aunt one afternoon. Did you hear about your mom changing the will? Daniel frowned at his phone. What the hell? I looked up. What? He turned his phone to show me the message. I frowned. She's making changes. The aunt had texted. Says she can't trust certain people anymore. My stomach turned. You think she's trying to punish you? Daniel shrugged, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Margaret knew money wasn't what mattered to him. But she also knew that cutting him out of the will would send a clear message: he was being erased. That wasn't the twist, though. Because what Margaret didn't know was that her late husband, Daniel's father, had a will of his own. And that will was about to change everything. Margaret's late husband, Frank, had passed away years ago. Everyone assumed she had inherited everything. The house, the savings, the investments. But Frank had been smarter than people gave him credit for. Uncle Robert called Daniel a few days later. You're not gonna believe this, he said. What? Daniel asked. Your dad's old will? The one Margaret never mentioned? Robert let out a sharp laugh. Turns out, your dad left money for all the kids. Not just Margaret. Daniel sat up straight. What? Yeah. He put aside a significant amount. It was meant to be split between you, Rachel, and David. My jaw dropped. Then why did Margaret get everything? Uncle Robert's voice was bitter. Because she hid it. Never filed it properly. Took control of the estate before anyone could ask questions. Daniel's face darkened. She stole our inheritance. Looks like it, Robert said. But guess what? I got a copy. Margaret had erased Daniel from her own will, but Frank's original will, the one she had buried, had just surfaced. And now? Margaret was about to have a very big problem. Daniel didn't wait. He marched straight to Margaret's house. She opened the door, looking smug. Oh, so you finally came to your senses? Daniel's face was like stone. Where's Dad's will? He asked. Margaret froze. Just for a second. But I caught it. Then she scoffed. What are you talking about? Daniel pulled out the copy Uncle Robert had sent him. This. Margaret's face strained of color. Where's the money? Daniel asked. Her eyes darted around. I don't know what you mean, don't lie, he said sharply. Dad left all of us an inheritance. But somehow you kept it all. Where is it? Margaret's lips pressed together. Then she did what she always did when she got caught. She cried. Daniel, I was just trying to protect you. Your father, he didn't understand finances. I knew if I gave you that money, you'd waste it. I saved you from making a mistake. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. You didn't save us, he said coldly. You stole from us. She let out a wail. I did it for you. I did it because I love you. But this time? No one believed her. Margaret tried everything to keep control. She screamed. She cried. She played the victim. But Daniel was done. He lawyered up. Rachel and David did too. Uncle Robert helped them track everything down, every account, every asset. Margaret had funneled everything into her name. And now? She was about to lose it all. Her own children were suing her. The same kids she had tried to control, manipulate, and punish were now taking back what was rightfully theirs. And Margaret was finally alone. Because the moment that lawsuit hit, every single person in the family, even the ones who had defended her before, finally saw her for what she was. And that was the one thing she couldn't handle. Margaret fought hard. She hired a lawyer, cried to anyone who would listen, and spun every story imaginable to make herself the victim. They're trying to take everything from me, she sobbed to Rachel. Rachel, who had always been the more forgiving one, didn't fall for it this time. You took it from us first. Margaret tried guilt-tripping Daniel. I'm your mother. How can you do this to me? Daniel just stared at her. You did this to yourself. She even tried calling her friends, the ones she had left. But they were done with her too. Eleanor, the same friend who had once gossiped with her, said bluntly. You brought this on yourself, Margaret. I don't feel bad for you. For the first time in her life, Margaret had nowhere to turn. And then? She started losing. The case was open and shut. Frank's will was real. The money was supposed to be divided. Margaret had hidden it, forged documents, and illegally took control of the estate. And the court did not take kindly to that. The judge ruled in favor of Daniel, Rachel, and David. Every single cent she had taken was ordered to be returned. But it didn't stop there. Margaret had lied under oath, falsified legal records, and embezzled inheritance funds. And that was criminal. The court pressed charges. Margaret was charged with fraud and financial misconduct. She tried to act clueless, tried to cry, tried to plead ignorance, but the evidence was stacked against her. The court wasn't fooled. Her punishment? She lost the house. She lost her savings. She was given a 2-year suspended sentence and mandatory community service. She avoided jail time, barely. But she was financially ruined. She had spent years building her life around status, around power. She controlled people with money, with guilt, with manipulation. Now, she had nothing. And no one was there to help her. Margaret tried one last thing. She called Daniel one final time. I know I made mistakes, she said, her voice small for the first time in her life. But I'm still your mother. Please, Daniel. I just want my family back. Daniel took a long breath. Then he said, Family doesn't do what you did. And then? He hung up. That was the last time he ever spoke to her. Rachel and David cut contact too. Margaret, once the queen of the family, was now completely alone. Daniel's company found out everything. They saw the false complaints she had filed. They saw the lengths she went to just to hurt him. And they blacklisted her. She could never file another complaint there again. They knew what kind of person she was. And just to be safe, Daniel legally ensured that she could never mess with his life again. Restraining order. No contact. Nothing. She was erased from our lives, the way she had tried to erase Daniel from hers. Daniel, Rachel, and David got their rightful inheritance. They donated some of it, used the rest to build better lives for themselves. Margaret? She lived out her years alone, with nothing but her own regrets to keep her company. And that was justice.